Scalar interferometric stealth radar, aka scatter radar. How does stealthy scatter radar work in terms of low probability of interception? You must remember two facts to understand scalar scatter radar. Photons reflect off of surfaces at 90-degree angles, and they do not convert to other photon types during flight, except, of course, Doppler shifting due to relativistic effects of space dilation or contraction in reflecting off moving objects. Being two coherent monochromatic photon streams at an object 180 degrees out of phase with very little difference in intensity will render the measurable energy at the intersecting path nearly zero in terms of its combined electromagnetic field, but the photons still exist and continue their flight path and reflection points, which can be read accordingly through phase angle filtering or where the beams no longer intersect at a distance. This technique is especially useful if a tracking lock has occurred and the target's location is already known. Using time-of-flight filtering and Doppler shifting to update location adds to the precision of all low-probability detection radar imaging techniques. In the reverse mode of constructive interference, all the intersecting beams would add their intensity together and maximum energy transference to objects would occur. How does this relate to mind-reading radar? The Russians first used scatter radar on the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. The microwaves used to collect the brain resonance changes in electron spin resonances were scalars from phased arrays. The microwave energy was still detectable and far from a perfect scalar, but the measurable microwave energy could have been the influence signal necessary to affect brainwave modulation. Putting deflecting screens on the building actually increased the energy readings. This is because if you block one path of two intersecting beams, the full energy of one of the beams will be measured, as well as confine the scalar energy that penetrated the walls, then separated into the individual paths. Once the beam paths separate out of a scalar, the energy has more difficulty escaping back through the walls and windows, now with screens on them. Synthetic telepathy and microwave hearing effect. There is actually a subtle difference between these two communication modes, called synthetic telepathy and microwave hearing effect. The microwave hearing effect is thought to heat the brain slightly and cause a pressure wave to the inner ear, according to Dr. Ling from the University of Illinois. Other microwave hearing devices claim that they stimulate the auditory nerves, and a third claims it stimulates the brain cells in the auditory cortex using microwaves. This is the crossover point to synthetic telepathy. The microwave hearing effect is often used during the brain mapping processes. Words are stimulated to be heard, and the automated mapping software records the whole brain patterns that are triggered by that word. So meanings of words are now mapped to the sounds. Synthetic telepathy uses both the direct stimulation of the audio cortex and word association brain areas for brain-to-brain communication. It is a far more accurate and efficient way to convey ideas and thoughts without misinterpretations. The pulsed microwave audiograms are heard as sound, but usually needs background noise to be heard, given the illusion that the source of the background sound is the source of the pulsed audiogram transmission. During my time as an unpaid quality assurance engineer for EG heterodynamic experimentation, I was able to achieve pure thought communication based on word meaning without internal voice or microwave hearing transmissions. It is creepy to be that close to someone else's mind. While speaking a different language throws off the other hive mind participants in the sentence completion software, it doesn't entirely prevent thought reading, because words are mapped to concepts and meanings, and those are conveyed if a good mind mapping has been achieved. Now, we'll get to the section called the Promised Land, and there's a device called the Universal Translator based on this concept. So let's take a look now at some evidence to back a lot of this up. Communicating via the microwave auditory effect is the title of a small business contract for the Department of Defense. Communication initial results are, quote, the feasibility of the concept has been established, unquote, using both low and high power systems. A Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request as to the project's outcome, met with denial on the part of the Air Force, on the grounds that disclosure, quote, could reasonably be expected to cause damage to national security. That's just a signaling mechanism saying, yes, it was a success. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a national issue. Though the Air Force denied the FOIA disclosure, such a contract's purpose is elaborated by the Air Force's New World Vistas report. It would appear possible to create high-fidelity speech in the human body, raising the possibility of covert suggestion and psychological direction. It continues, if a pulse stream is used. It should be possible to create an internal acoustic field in the 5 to 15 kilohertz range, which is audible. Thus, it may be possible to talk to selected adversaries in a fashion that would be most disturbing to them, unquote. Robert Becker, whose eminence was enough to have been twice nominated for the Nobel Prize in Biological Electromagnetic Field Research, is explicit regarding clandestine uses. Such a device has obvious applications in covert operations designed to drive a target crazy with voices or deliver undetectable instructions to a programmed assassin, unquote. A microwave voice transmission non-lethal weapon is referenced in the thesaurus of the Center for Army Lessons Learned. An article from a magazine that publishes notably non-mainstream views details microwave inner voice device demonstrated by Dr. Morgan at a 1993 classified Johns Hopkins-sponsored non-lethal weapons conference, manufactured by Lockheed Sanders and used by the CIA, who call the process voice synthesis or synthetic telepathy. Electromagnetic signatures of spoken words applied to the head at very low field levels, 1 microtorr, affect word choice significantly along the emotional dimensions of the applied word. Though inspired by microwave hearing, this report is not of direct hearing. The author suggests that such an influence, even though weak, could shift the direction of group decisions in large populations, and has previously elaborated on the possibility of a less specific electromagnetic influence on populations, such as influence in voting. Now the research gets even more interesting. Psychic spying through animals. The Navy has since the 40s, or even earlier, tried to train dolphins as suicide bombers. Dolphins swim silently, strapping a bomb to them and getting them to approach an enemy sub or boat was the goal. They now have complete control, remote control of sharks to do this trick. However, one civilian researcher in EG cloning amplified someone else's brainwaves using magnetic coils to inject it into his brain. He said he could see a flashlight bright spot in his vision where the clone subject was looking into a bright spotlight moving around. He felt really agitated during this experiment. He said he wouldn't try it again. He started doing research with EEG heterodyning with dolphins. That is all I could track as to his progress. Now, interestingly, Neuroscience magazine reported that with electrodes implanted in a cat's brain, they could decipher the visual cortex and to display the cat's vision on a computer screen. It seems like a logical inference that you could then use animals' visual cortex to do spying too. What would it be like to try and map other species' minds onto a human, I wonder? Maybe we would all become vegetarians if we tried it and we could feel what other species feel. If not, we can still apply a consciousness metric to every species, including fetuses. We can then make an informed decision about the line we draw and what we can kill without remorse. The Death Doctors, as they are called, performed an experiment using an implanted cyberlink from a child to an ape. The experiment was to see if the ape would recognize the little child's mind and be calm when the child was put into the cage. The experiment failed and the child was killed immediately. Clearly, the DoD-funded Death Doctors were very interested in controlling animals and viewing through their mind or eyes with this line of research. Star Wars and Spa War. The division within the government that strategizes about space conflict is called Spa War, shortened from Space Wars. What many call science fiction, I know to be current science fact. It took the top DARPA scientist almost 5 years to figure out what the Russians were doing to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Clearly, the best scientists do not work for the Department of Defense. Earlier, I described a disinformation campaign on destructive interference fringes called scalar waves by the Weapons Marketing Division. Keep this in mind. Let's perform some thought experiments in the tradition of Einstein. So here's the problem rephrased. If two wavefronts destructively interfere at the point of measurement, how can you separate the photons such that you can determine whether a destructive fringe is being measured from two interfering waveforms? With normal measuring equipment, it would read zero, almost, in both the electric and magnetic fields. A pinhole camera would block all but one path of the rays and reveal a single source of energy. A convex mirror would also separate the signal and amplify the very, very small angle of incidence. These are scalar detectors or scatter radar detectors. I leave the specifics of engineering one up to the reader. The other way to look at the problem is to view the sources from a radio telescope to get the resolution necessary to separate the very separate sources of the energy and pinpoint them. It would take a very large dish to do this. This makes you wonder if this is why we invest so much as a country into looking at the stars. Using pinhole photography techniques to resolve scalar energy can be difficult. The problem is that the frequency can be changed, and hence the alignment of the holes would change, but that is the basic idea of how to turn an interference fringe scalar gravity wave, if you will, into free energy, in quotes. All this technology can be discovered by researching Russian translated documents, but so many of the ideas get lost in the verbatim translation. You need to understand the errors of translation between languages to get the nuances of the ideas. All the lies and propaganda makes one wonder if that perhaps through psychological warfare, i.e. propaganda, we have been persuaded to fight for the dark side of the force in the delusion that we are fighting for democracy and freedom. So let's take a look at some more aspects of how advanced this mind interfacing technology has become. This section's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I know that I'm probably going into too much detail about the CIA mind control experiments, but one that I found particularly interesting is that they can determine what images and forms you find attractive. They can show you a sequence of people and determine through some brainwave response who you found attractive. This could be useful if they were to use an agent to try and extract information or gain confidence through intimacy, let's say. And on a funny note, I was told that one characteristic that CIA field agents usually have is below average looks. And the psychological advantage is that most people don't remember or stare at average or below average looking people, and hence it makes them more covert in their missions. The truth isn't nearly quite as glamorous as James Bond or Mission Impossible. And one of the more advanced microwave hearing effect tricks is called the phase angle segmentation of voice throwing. Imagine a bunch of soldiers surrounding a speaker listening to static, barely able to pick up their orders, which are cutting in and out, garbled intentionally by the electronic warfare jammers. Every listener will have a different angle relative to the speaker. It is possible to make every person hear different commands coming through the speaker. Several psychic soldiers could get them to argue over what was heard or get them all to do the wrong things in a disorganized fashion. How is this done? I was demonstrating this technique for an entire day and had many different theories how it was done at the time, but I'm certain that the ventriloquism and bar trick is done in this way. So an amusing spy game that was played with me, as a nice distraction from the torture, was an encoded message, one like I had never seen. I studied how to crack DES and other encryption technologies, but had no real experience in the hacking techniques of the human mind before my ordeal. In secret government laboratories, the encryption keys are changed as frequently as can be cracked by the best decryption machines they have. The human brain cannot change its encryption, so once decoded, your brain is forever part of the TAMI database and network. The mind has no firewall. That is a reference to an article written by a U.S. Army War College professor. Using any noise source, specific frequencies from that source can be identified perceptually. So, encoding a voice pattern into a noisy source is simply a matter of timing of the neural pathways that amplify the perception of the projected voice frequencies. In my research into FBI cases and interviews with government test subjects, it is obvious that any noise source can be used, and in some cases not even necessary depending on the individual's brain amplification. I have read testimony that describes how refrigerators or even Rice Krispies would talk to test subjects. In my demonstration, I had a rainmaker/noise generator running. It had a single speaker. The message was complex, patterned, and repetitive. I heard a sequence of 4 words which rotated through 10 other sets after each phrase was uttered in a poetic style. The phrases were, "Talk to your governor," "I'll bring you coffee," "I am the secretary," "Now raise a caucus," "Dukakis went to Harvard," "Join their cosmology department." And this game got boring to me since I was not a spy and turned off by the cloak and dagger bullshit. I would walk away. At about 10 feet away from the noise source, the message became, "Get back here!" It was all computer generated. Later they explained the cloak and dagger game to me. The basic gist of the message was that the Secretary of Defense ordered these projects. All you can do is complain to your governor. Michael Dukakis maybe has a chance at running for president, but people who are familiar with the Kennedy assassination conspiracy and mind control angle also know that Dukakis' run for presidency was interfered with using these directed energy mind control weapons. So the message is that it is even futile trying to change the government. At the time, I didn't understand the message to join the cosmology department completely. It is that this is all done by Star Wars technology, and a clue that stealth radar, scatter radar, uses scalar waves which can only be resolved using a radio telescope. The cloak and dagger game got even more complicated. By rotating the sound source or by walking by the device, I would hear a different set of the 4-word messages depending on my head orientation to the sound source. The real message could only be heard by walking from left to right after one word was uttered. There were 4 segmented phase angles with a different set of words that would be played in each and then rotated. But the real messages could only be deciphered if you followed the word train in order through each segmented phase angle. The real message was encoded in a few of the diagonals of each of the word trains. This was just a spy game, and the messages are irrelevant. It was just a test. Now let's look at the science behind the trick. Close your eyes and listen to your environment. You can pinpoint the location and direction of all the sounds. How does your brain know where the sound is coming from? Bats are exceptionally good at locating objects based on sound. We have a type of sonar built into our audio cortex. Using just tonal quality and the difference in timing of the sound waves hitting each eardrum, our brain creates a model of what and where the sound source is. Modern surround sound systems use this science to create virtual speakers and the perception of being immersed into a movie from all directions. By analyzing the brainwaves associated with hearing and integrated at the base of the brain, one can determine the perceived sound direction of the source. The Bayer auditory test, using traditional EEG probes placed behind the ear, can pick up these neural pathways. From signal analysis, the phase angle of the sound sources is determined and segmented into groups. The predominant sound source is easily identified, and depending on which phase angle segmentation is classified, a different computer-generated voice message is modulated into the neuronal amplification and thereby the perception of frequencies. This is the crux of the ventriloquism act played on so many people. It is pretty obvious how voice throwing can be used to get someone to check out a false noise or voice and leave their posts. And if you're following along the book, there are several real examples of EEG patterns collected demonstrating this phase angle segmentation trick. Now we start getting into the tactics of being a psychic soldier. The section is called Illusions of Mind. Into the second week of my torture, I was told that most projects, in quotes, are terminated with car crashes or heart attacks. Although the microwave hearing effect is debilitating and very distracting, I actually consider myself lucky to have been told all the experiments before they happened or explained how they were accomplished while they were performing them. Most projects are never told and left confused or dead. After surviving the constant remote heart attack attempts, I had to be vigilant of the psychic assassination attempts through car crashes. There are the bland methods for automobile assassinations, such as hypnotizing the subject to run red lights, suddenly jerking their arms to steer out the road, putting them to sleep, or blinding their mind's eye to see an obstruction or approaching object, etc. But the more extreme and visually exciting methods was discussed by Dr. Becker back in the early 1970s on the news. He said that this technology could be used to create visual perception errors to make airplane pilots crash, etc. JFK Jr.'s demise could have been caused in this way and assassinated like his father by the same shadow government. Princess Diana's demise could have been caused by these weapons, or maybe they were natural perceptual errors and judgments. In any case, I was shown how, during night driving, lights from oncoming cars, the road markers, or distant houses could be made to move around and appear in the foreground, then in the background again. I was told this is accomplished by the psychic attackers synchronizing with the host's visual cortex strongly while they are in a dark room. They then shine a pinpoint flashlight and move it around in their own, i.e. the attacker's, eyes. What happens is the brain signals from the attacker are sent to the target, and the target's visual cortex tries to make sense of the two competing signals, his own from the optic nerves and the attacker's. If you were able to see the secret message on the cover of this book, then you get a good sense how the brain will extract depth information from higher order patterns and can mismatch the data from each eye. You have taken the first step to being a psychic soldier. Silly, isn't it? But effective. So I gave them some improvements in their techniques because, according to my research, they haven't changed their method much in 30 years. And I despise inefficiency, waste, lack of creativity, and slow progress. Clearly, I don't have a future in government. I suggested that they use a slide or hologram instead of the pinpoint light on their side. The hologram or slide could be images such as angels or demons' faces. I postulate that the target would see the subtle image in the light sources that his or her brain integrates with the attackers. This would give the very spooky and eerie illusion that souls or ghosts were passing by on the road for each point source of light. The effect should be similar to that demonstrated in the movie Poltergeist. Maybe they've already thought of this. They seem very excited about the possibilities to try it on their next project after I was dead. And if you're following along the book, you can see images of how this works. So, stupid alien tricks. Let's get back to those. On day 3 of my brain napping, the aliens demonstrated some hilarious visual manipulations. They could put pixelated shadow animations in my peripheral vision of a running man. They could create subtle shadow illusions of children in the road. While it could make someone swerve who was unfamiliar with this technology, it was fascinating and amusing to me to see. I believe a horror movie was just released that demonstrates the ghost children who make people crash their cars. There are no ghosts, just shadow government testing of EEG heterodyne weapons. The visual cortex illusions seem to only work in dim lighting, which is intuitively what you would expect. Less sensory stimuli and information there is, the more easily external signals can influence the neurons. I interviewed psychic war test subjects that were fully convinced that they saw a wall open up into a war room with uniformed soldiers and other objects materialize. My visual cortex was never mapped that well, but you can see that fully conjured images, as real as what is presented from your optic nerves, can be induced in some subjects. The technology seems to have gotten better since the 70s, when people just saw shadowy ghost-like figures in these hauntings. The ghost in the machine. Electronic warfare capabilities have become so refined that all electronic devices can be made to malfunction. The military-directed energy labs are perfecting ways to induce electromagnetic signals so precisely as to reprogram your computer, or more easily influence your keyboard and mouse. If they can do it to a brain, they can do it to other electronics. Almost all targeted individuals report these kinds of tests of electronic control. I will save my amazing accounts for the movie. of real footage in order for you to see and believe. These capabilities far exceed the older weapons of EMP, which is electromagnetic pulse, and HERF weapons that could stall your car or fry your data drives. The military gremlins are wreaking havoc in their electronic warfare exercises on the unsuspecting citizens. And see the appendix for the Air Force Directed Energy Truly Futuristic Weapons Descriptions. Perhaps EMP and HERF weapons could be tested on the ionospheric heaters in their computing facilities to see if a minor disruption would cure thousands of people of pain and mental illness worldwide. Let's take another perspective. Abstractly, think about the Earth's magnetic field as an ocean. If you move through it, you will create an electromagnetic wake, which can be detected since all charged particles have a resistance to motion when bathed in a magnetic pool, except if they're moving along the lines of the field. There is an effect called electron cyclotronic current driving. It is usually only studied under extreme conditions in high-energy physics laboratories, but it may be a possible mechanism of the current induced in the ionic channels of the neuron. Microwaves and a magnetic field is all you need. The lens effect from ionosphere signal bouncing. The Earth's ionosphere is spherical. This allows a phased array beam to be bounced off the ionosphere and focused on a point on the Earth. The total internal reflection only occurs at a certain angle from the source. Let's imagine you are in a swimming pool underwater looking up. You see people standing above on the edge of the pool, but when you look further away, you see the surface of the water acting like a mirror and reflecting the interior of the pool. This is exactly how the Earth's atmosphere acts with vacuum outside in space or at the ionospheric layers. So now imagine that the pool that you are in is somehow curved into a spheroid. When you look out of the pool, people will look smaller, and the mirror portion will act like a telescope amplifying small points inside the pool depending on your angle of view. The reflection amplification is due to the curvature, and the shrinking of the outside view is due to the refraction effects. Do you get the picture yet? Satellites would have the reverse effect. The atmosphere would act like an amplifying lens at very high frequencies, making the Earth act like it is under a microscope. But this refraction effect is minimal at less than visible light spectrum. So these over-the-horizon radar systems, which are mostly used for viewing and tracking people, have the radar signatures bounced off of the Earth's atmosphere in a donut-like circle for the strongest energy areas due to this phenomenon known as total internal reflection. The energy that does not hit the vacuum of space or different layers of the ionosphere at the angle of total internal reflection will have a much larger percent of its energy dissipated into space. So here's what it looks like, and if you're following along, you get a diagram of how over-the-horizon radars work and the phenomenon of total internal reflection. Now, more importantly, in order to find a point on Earth where people might find sanctuary from the U.S. virtual hell, we only need to calculate the angles of total internal reflection based on the index of refraction for various radar wavelengths to see the range in which they are active. The U.S. and NATO allies have 15 or more giant antenna fields covering most of the world, so an intersection of all the active areas shows us it is almost a total and complete global surveillance system. Interesting to note, though, is that the intersection of HARP, the Brazilian, the Puerto Rico's radar fields, and a couple other active fields all intersect over the U.S. and then cover the rest of the hemisphere. Even South Wales' ionospheric heated radar field can observe through the radar magnifying glass U.S. citizens. However, due to the ozone holes over the North and South Poles, the performance is different. This explains all the research interest from the DoD into ionospheric conditions and cold plasma research. Every time there is a wake or anomaly in the smooth surface of the ionosphere due to a hurricane or some other event, the lens is disrupted, and victims in that part of the world find relief from the killing and torture signals. After the last two major hurricanes in the U.S., I received reports from victims that they escaped the torture during the hurricanes. They, of course, came to the conclusion that the hurricane must have knocked out the power stations which ran the directed energy weapon. They were unaware of the ionosphere lens effect. It shows a defense weakness both in the Continental Ballistic Missile Surveillance System and the Psychotronic Torture System, which are one and the same. Eastern medicine. There is a technique practiced called healing hands, where practitioners move their hands without touching the patient all over the person's body who has experienced discomfort, and somehow it makes them feel better. Sounds like voodoo. There is a psychological component to this, but since the ionospheric radar systems are so powerful, many people around the world feel the effects, even if they aren't directly targeted for torture. These static electricity fields created between the healer and the patient are moved, and the body electrical resonances and electron spin alignments are altered. The person feels better while the practitioner is doing it. Amazing how much human suffering these military surveillance systems are causing and have caused. Even the magnetic jewelry craze and negative ion generators that make people feel better can be linked to these radar signals and human surveillance techniques of bioelectric field modulation and reading. The cover story of ionospheric heating and observation of meteors is almost 99% bullshit in terms of the true purpose of these systems. More psychic phenomena explained. I, like most people, never understood the voodoo of quartz crystals that the New Age crowd was into. Some of the healing effects are, of course, due to the placebo effect and power of suggestion. But so many people are affected by the scatter radar energy, which has been around since 1960, that people have discovered things that make them feel better without knowing the exact underlying physics and biology. Negative ion generators are now standard in fans. Magnetic jewelry has become quite popular because of its lessening of pain effects. And quartz crystals work for some people. It turns out that quartz disrupts scatter radar fields due to the wavelengths at which they operate. So much pain and suffering throughout the world can be explained by the electromagnetic pollution of these stealthy scalar scatter radar systems tracking waveforms.